Really pleased to bring in Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. As always, nice to chat with you, Tom.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Great to have you. Let's talk about the big news of the night. All reporters waiting with eager anticipation to bring down the Trump presidency by virtue of whatever Bob Mueller was going to dispatch, and he did. There was a statement last night indicating that he is recommending no jail time at all. Zero. Not a single day. For Michael Flynn, the president's former national security advisor. What do you read into that news?
Well, I don't think he'd dare recommend jail time given the way that Flynn was treated and the questions about his initial prosecution. I reviewed the materials. It doesn't add too much to what we already know, but it doesn't answer the questions that we still have about how Flynn was, in my view, set up by the Obama gang on their way out the door, and then with the acting Attorney General Sally Yates. The material filed with the court makes reference in the beginning to a Washington Post story that contained an illegal leak of classified information, unmasking information, where Flynn was talking to an ambassador. I guess that they wiretapped the Russian ambassador, I guess, as an ordinary matter of business, which is fine. And they suggested he may have violated the Logan Act. The Logan Act, you may ask what the Logan Act is. Well, I'm not going to describe what the Logan Act is other than it's never prosecuted. It prohibits individuals from personally conducting their own foreign policy. The idea that the Logan Act would be used as a pretext to target Flynn shows you how corrupt the initial look-see of him was, because it's not prosecuted and it would never dare be prosecuted or used as a pretext for investigation to target the transition team of an incoming president. So the idea that the National Security Advisor, or frankly the national security advisor of a likely president, would be targeted for communicating with foreign leaders or foreign representatives is absurd. And I don't believe Flynn lied, and I don't believe he even violated the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is another aspect here, because the initial FBI agents, Peter Strzok and company, according to reports, didn't think he lied. So how did it go from he didn't lie to he had to plead guilty to lying? I think that's something I wish Congress would ask Mr. Mueller, for instance, about.
Well, and that's the thing that's so insane, because everything that you laid out, Vince and I were discussing this before. I'm like, I don't even understand why he was even questioned about this. Like, I just don't understand how the questions by the FBI were asked in the first place. And Republicans have just sat back and watched this happen. One of the things we're seeing about from this release of heavily redacted, by the way, reports. So we didn't get to see a lot of what Flynn told him. We don't know. There's probably more redacted than what you actually see. Was something about dealing with another crime that we don't know about, indication of another crime that we don't know anything about.
Well, I don't know what's happening other than there's no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, which is what Mr. Mueller putatively was hired to investigate. He had major Russia indictments take place against the hackers and people who were actually attempting to intervene in our political system,
who are also inaccessible to us.
True, and in those indictments, both in those indictments and in a description of those indictments, it's been made clear no Americans knowingly work with the Russians to intervene in the elections in terms of specifically hacking anyone or placing bots or ads or stories in Facebook and places like that, which seem to be pretty low-rent stuff for a federal prosecutor to be looking at.
So what you're talking about, the exculpatory stuff, like him mentioning in the actual charging documents for these Russians who've invaded our political apparatus, the Democratic Party in that case, he said out loud in that no Americans knowingly worked with them. He said that in the documents. Mueller has said as much, yet the press never cites that. Also, James Comey said out loud, as you just pointed out, that the FBI agents who interviewed Mike Flynn didn't even believe he was lying, which the press never points out. And then the last treatment of the press that I want to highlight, and we're going to get your reaction to, is what we've heard in the last 12 hours, which is they hear that Special Counsel Bob Mueller says, I'm recommending 0 days in jail for Mike Flynn because he provided, quote, substantial assistance to the Russia probe. I'm hearing from analysts on CNN, things like this, that Donald Trump should be worried about this. We don't even know what he assisted with. He may have assisted in sort of proving that there is no collusion all the way through. Yet the assumption that the press is making is that he gave the smoking gun to Bob Mueller.
Well, exactly. And believe me, Mueller knows this, and I think he throws the word Russia out there. Well, Flynn talked to the Russian ambassador, so the implication is there was something skullduggerous going on. Michael Cohen.
I love that word. I'm sorry, I just giggled. Go ahead.
And Michael, the president's former personal attorney, they were working on a Russia real estate deal that everyone knew about. Mm-hmm. So therefore, the word Russia is used. So let's get that out there as often as we can.
Was it legal for Trump to build a building in Russia or to license a building with his name? The answer to that was yes. No. But nobody seems to even care about whether or not that's the case. They just like, oh, Trump's awful.
Well, and why is the special counsel making hay out of this and putting in charging documents suggesting that communications about such a building is inappropriate when with the president or the incoming president, the candidate at the time, or his family? It shows you that, in my view, that Mueller is desperate to justify his continued existence and his prior work, and so he's, Lord help you if you're under his sights and you have a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon association with any of this.
Could the Mueller investigation, do we know what they've been charged with investigating Russian collusion in the election or Russian interference in the election, period, or only in regards to Trump? Because if it's about Russia collusion or influence, collusion with the Russians to influence the election, we know that the Clinton campaign paid a foreign agent to get information from the Russians.
Right.
So am I just hanging on to the last tiny bit of hope that we might actually find something out about Russian investigation involvement, in the election, or not? No,
because Mueller would, if in order to investigate the full panoply of Russia collusion, he would have to investigate himself. Because, as you point out, Mary, the Clinton DNC Fusion GPS, if you can read the testimony about this in Congress, they said, well, we were using Russia intelligence sources. Our guy, Christopher Steele, was using Russian intelligence sources to get this dossier going. And this dossier was the basis for the Mueller investigation. It was used to justify a FISA warrant for Mr. Mueller himself. You raise the fundamental corruption of this investigation, that it's looking at one person for doing something wrong. There's no evidence of it, while ignoring the evidence that something maybe more directed happened in terms of Russia connection, but it's evidence they find convenient to use to justify the attack on Trump.
All right. We've got more with Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, coming up. We're going to talk to you about Cohen's plea deal, because we're looking at documents coming out at the end of the week involving Cohen. And also want to talk to you about Grassley accusing a GPS founder, Glenn Simpson, of extremely misleading testimony, maybe lying. Imagine that. We'll find out more. 7:15. We're here with Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, joining us in studio. Tom, the Senate Judiciary Committee Chair, I cannot speak today, Chuck Grassley, drawing parallels between the false testimony that Michael Cohen gave to Congress in 2017 and what he calls extremely misleading statements made by Glenn Simpson, who is the founder of GPS, that he made. And he sent a letter to Richard Blumenthal, the Connecticut Democrat senator, saying that I hope you investigate this. I hope you look, if we're looking at misleading statements, I would hope that you would look at Glenn Simpson's misleading statements as well. Are we going to just ignore Glenn Simpson's misleading statements and we only go after misleading statements from Republicans? Is that what this is going to be?
I looked at Cohen, for instance. He was pled guilty to perjury or lying to Congress. I looked at that. I didn't see where he actually had lied or where he didn't have an argument that he was telling the truth or trying to be forthcoming with Congress. But in the case of Glenn Simpson, Grassley's concerned that he testified that he wasn't doing this anti-Trump Russia material after investigation after the election, when in fact it looks like someone had hired him to do it.
Right. So a change in date really matters there, given that it's on either side of the election, and he was doing it after the election, even though he says he wasn't.
That's true, and given the fact that Christopher Steele, for instance, continued to work with the Justice Department after the election, also suggests that he was still working on the topic generally. Was Steele doing it on his own or for Fusion GPS? But these are all Mueller's witnesses, so who knows what's going to happen with these guys, right?
Why does Bob Mueller need to handle all this crap?
Why doesn't Chuck Grassley get involved? He's the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
But also, why doesn't the Justice Department broadly investigate these things? I mean, like, Bob Mueller exists, so I think we all kind of get this idea that he needs to suck in all of these various investigations, and if he's not investigating all of it, he's being unfair. Okay, got it. Whatever. If you think the Mueller investigation is unfair, it's unfair. He's picking his shots. But how come the Justice Department isn't taking on these cases?
Because to investigate Mueller's witnesses, to investigate the misuse of Fusion GPS's dossier, means investigating itself, and also gets in the way of the Mueller investigation and the justification and the morality and ethics of it.
Right.
So,
but
so they're going to Mueller's the king of the Justice Department on all of these issues.
Bingo.
And anything that gets in his way will not be investigated.
That's the crazy thing. He's a subordinate to the Attorney General. He's supposed to be. And so why wouldn't there be other investigations on similar subjects, stuff that Mueller's not taking up? We don't even know the scope of Mueller's investigation because the scope memo has never been released. Rod Rosenstein has not released it.
Yeah, what's interesting is that the full scope hasn't been released. By the way, the scope of which they came up with months after he was appointed. President Trump removed Jeff Sessions, and now there's an acting attorney general. It looks to me like, in theory, he's supposed to be supervising Mueller, and Rosenstein isn't doing it anymore. When, in fact, practically speaking, he has no supervision because the acting attorney general has been put in a box again by the left, who is trying to protect Mueller. Look, the Cohen plea deal. Whitaker found out after Rosenstein did. Who's running the show at the Justice Department?
What do you think about this Jeff Flake move to stop all business in the Senate to protect Bob Mueller? He wants to get legislation on the floor to vote to protect Bob Mueller from the president, and which is, by the way, I think unconstitutional. And he's saying until that happens, he's not going to allow a single judicial appointment to move forward in the Senate.
Well, what it means is that I think many of these judicial appointees who have been victimized as a result of this lengthy consideration that the Senate's forced upon them needlessly by the left, who's running the Democratic Party right now in the Senate, they're just going to have to wait longer. And it's too bad. It's not the end of the world. I mean, it's a political move by Flake as he leaves to make a show that he supports Mueller and flipping the bird, practically speaking, at the president as he leaves.
Yeah.
But these judicial nominees are further victimized by these moves like this. It's one thing to use Senate back and forth to get your way in a way that doesn't necessarily impact people as directly as he has. But these are good nominees who've waited and whose careers are on hold, and now it will be another probably 4 to 5 months before they get an answer one way or another from the Senate.
What do you think of the Cohen plea deal? I mean, what does that show? Do we get anything from that? Do we learn anything from the Cohen plea deal?
Well, as we're talking in the beginning, Mary, it's a further excuse for the media to use the word Russia and Trump in the same sentence. And it has nothing to do with Russia collusion. I think the working theory is because President Trump had the idea potentially of doing business in Russia, somehow it makes it more likely that he was colluding with them. Look, when you've got a crazy conspiracy theory, which the Russia collusion theory is, every fact that comes up, you try to figure out how to insert into the theory. And facts that don't actually advance the theory that this was a business deal that was canceled, that no one suggests was illegal, somehow suggest illegal Russia collusion, it doesn't matter because it all just comes back in the end to Trump and Russia, Trump and Russia, Trump and Russia, and heck, we want him to leave office.
Yeah, well, now we're seeing some allegations coming from House and Senate committees saying that maybe it looks like Mueller may have left some exonerating evidence out of that exonerates the president and/or exonerates Cohen out of some of their documents. And that's
did Cohen not talk to President Trump about some of these deals? I don't know. What did Cohen say? When did he say it? all those details that may or may not make it clearer that the president, or more importantly, his family, didn't have the involvement that's suggested by implication in the plea deal. It'd be good to get that information out there. But Congress, again, is falling down on the job in terms of not holding Mueller accountable, and certainly the House is not going to be able to do that within a few weeks.
Oh, well, then they don't have to worry
Or
about
not going to want to do it.
Yeah, they don't want to do it. I think that's right. Tom, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's always great having you. 724 on WMAL.